I realized private school was overrated the day I found out my classmate was selling answers to tests and sleeping with a teacher. The revelation came on a Tuesday afternoon in November, during what should have been just another ordinary day at Westfield Academy, the prestigious private school in Charlotte, North Carolina that my parents had sacrificed everything to afford. I was sitting in the library, struggling through my AP chemistry homework, when I overheard a conversation that would completely shatter my faith in the institution my family had placed on a pedestal. "Just Venmo me the 50, and I'll send you the answers tonight," whispered Madison Ashworth, the golden girl of our senior class, to 3 other students huddled around a corner table. "Mr. Peterson always uses the same test bank. I've got the answer keys for the next 3 exams." I froze, my pencil hovering over my notebook. Madison was not only the valedictorian candidate with a perfect 4.0 GPA, but she was also the student council president, captain of the debate team, and bound for Harvard in the fall. She was everything our school claimed to produce: brilliant, accomplished, destined for greatness. "What about the essay portion?" asked Tyler Walsh, a lacrosse player whose father owned half the commercial real estate in uptown Charlotte. Madison smirked, the kind of expression that looked innocent enough but carried undertones I was just beginning to recognize. "Don't worry about that. I've got it covered with Peterson. He's been very accommodating lately." The way she said accommodating made my stomach turn. Mr. Peterson was our AP chemistry teacher, a married man in his 40s with 2 young children whose photos sat prominently on his desk. He'd always been one of the more popular teachers, known for his easy grading and flexible deadline policies. I watched from behind my stack of textbooks as money discreetly changed hands, phones buzzed with Venmo notifications, and the group dispersed with satisfied smiles. Madison caught sight of me staring and walked over with the confidence that came from a lifetime of knowing she was untouchable. "Charlie, right?" she said, even though we'd been in classes together for 3 years. "You're not going to say anything about what you just heard, are you?" I was Charlie Rodriguez, the scholarship kid whose single mother worked double shifts as a nurse at Presbyterian Hospital to help cover what my academic scholarship didn't. While my classmates drove BMWs and spent spring break in Europe, I worked weekends at a local grocery store and wore the same 3 polo shirts in rotation because they were all we could afford from the uniform requirements. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said quietly, which wasn't exactly a lie but wasn't exactly the truth either. Madison's smile widened. "Good. Because it would be a shame if someone who's worked so hard to fit in here suddenly found themselves unwelcome." The threat was delivered with the same sweet tone she used when giving student council announcements, but the message was clear. I was already walking a tightrope at Westfield, the poor kid who didn't belong, tolerated because of my grades but never truly accepted. Speaking up about what I'd witnessed would push me right off that rope. After Madison walked away, I sat there staring at my chemistry homework, the equations suddenly seeming meaningless. For 3 years, I believed that Westfield Academy represented everything I was working toward: academic excellence, moral integrity, a pathway to a better life than the one my mother and I had known. I'd endured the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, classism, the constant reminder that I was there on charity, because I believed it was worth it. But if the star students were buying their way to success and the teachers were compromising their ethics, what exactly was I working so hard to achieve? That evening, I couldn't concentrate on my homework. Instead, I found myself thinking about all the little things I'd noticed but dismissed over the past few months. The way certain students always seemed to know exactly what would be on tests. The way grades sometimes seemed to correlate more with family donations than actual performance. The way Mr. Peterson had started paying extra attention to Madison, offering her additional tutoring sessions that other struggling students never seemed to get. I thought about my mother, who was probably just starting her night shift at the hospital, pulling 12-hour days to help pay for my school fees. She'd grown up poor in rural Mexico, immigrated to the U.S. with nothing, and had worked her entire adult life believing that education was the key to breaking the cycle of poverty. When I'd gotten the scholarship to Westfield, she'd cried tears of joy and picked up extra shifts to cover the remaining costs. "This is your chance, mijo," she'd said, using her worn hands to straighten my new uniform tie on my first day. This school will open doors for you that were never open for me. But what if those doors only opened for people willing to compromise their integrity? What if the excellence Westfield prided itself on was built on a foundation of corruption and privilege? Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention to the dynamics around me. I noticed that Madison's study group always seemed to include the same wealthy students, and their grades had mysteriously improved across multiple subjects. I observed Mr. Peterson's behavior more carefully and realized that his flexible policies seemed to apply almost exclusively to female students from prominent families. I watched Madison herself more closely and began to see through the facade of perfection. She was manipulative in ways that were almost artistic. She knew exactly how to play her teachers, her parents, and her peers to get what she wanted. The student council meetings she led were masterclasses in appearing democratic while ensuring her agenda was the only one that mattered. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, during what should have been a routine AP chemistry test. I'd studied for hours, working through practice problems until my eyes burned, determined to earn my grade honestly. But as I sat there struggling with a particularly difficult question about molecular structures, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Madison, sitting 2 rows ahead of me, was texting under her desk during the exam. Mr. Peterson was standing right behind her, clearly able to see what she was doing, but he said nothing. When she finished the test, suspiciously quickly for someone who'd claimed chemistry was her hardest subject, she walked up to his desk with a smile that made my skin crawl. "Thank you for the extra help with studying," she said loud enough for nearby students to hear. Those tutoring sessions really made the difference. Mr. Peterson's face flushed, and he mumbled something about being available for any student who needed help, but his eyes followed Madison as she left the classroom in a way that made me feel sick. I finished my test honestly, probably earning a B+ if I was lucky, and walked out feeling like I'd just witnessed something that fundamentally changed how I saw everything around me. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I skipped my after-school job and went to see the school counselor, Mrs. Hamilton. She was one of the few staff members who seemed to genuinely care about students rather than just managing them, and I hoped she might help me make sense of what I was experiencing. "Charlie," she said when I appeared in her office looking troubled, "what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." I sat in the chair across from her desk, surrounded by motivational posters about college preparation and character building, and tried to figure out how to voice the concerns that had been eating at me. "Mrs. Hamilton, what would you do if you found out that some of the top students weren't earning their grades honestly?" Her expression grew serious immediately. "That's a very serious accusation, Charlie. Do you have specific information about academic dishonesty?" I wanted to tell her everything, about the test answers being sold, about the inappropriate relationship I suspected between Madison and Mr. Peterson, about the way wealth and connections seemed to matter more than actual merit. But I also thought about Madison's threat, about how precarious my position at this school really was. "Hypothetically," I said carefully, "what would happen to someone who reported something like that?" Mrs. Hamilton leaned back in her chair, studying my face. "Well, the school has policies in place to protect students who report violations of the honor code. But I'll be honest with you, Charlie, it can be complicated when prominent families are involved." "Complicated how?" "Westfield Academy depends on donations and tuition from wealthy families. When there are allegations against students from those families, the administration sometimes faces pressure to handle things quietly." The honesty in her voice was both refreshing and devastating. Even the school counselor was acknowledging that justice at Westfield was influenced by money and status. "What if it involved a teacher too?" I asked. Mrs. Hamilton's expression darkened. "Charlie, if you know something about inappropriate conduct between a teacher and student, that's not something that can be handled quietly. That's a legal matter." I left her office more confused than ever. I had suspicions but not proof, concerns but not concrete evidence. And I was increasingly aware that pursuing this could destroy not just my own future at Westfield, but potentially my mother's faith in the system she'd sacrificed so much to get me into. The decision was made for me 2 days later, when I accidentally witnessed something that left no room for doubt or moral ambiguity. I'd stayed late to finish a project in the computer lab, working on a history presentation about economic inequality in Latin America, a topic that felt increasingly relevant to my daily life. The school was mostly empty by 6 p.m., with just a few teachers and custodial staff remaining. I was packing up my things when I heard voices coming from Mr. Peterson's classroom down the hall. I wouldn't normally have paid attention, but I recognized Madison's laugh, that practiced, musical sound she used when she wanted something from someone. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly walked down the hallway toward the chemistry classroom. The door was slightly ajar, and what I saw through the crack stopped me cold. Madison was sitting on Mr. Peterson's desk, her legs dangling over the edge, while he stood between them with his hands on her waist. They were kissing, and it wasn't the innocent peck of a student thanking a helpful teacher. This was intimate, passionate, and completely inappropriate. "Did you take care of my test grade?" Madison asked when they broke apart, her voice taking on a different quality than the sweet tone she used in public. "Of course," Mr. Peterson replied, his hands still on her body. "A+ as always. Though you really should try to make your answers look less perfect sometimes. Someone might start to notice." "Nobody notices anything around here," Madison said with a laugh. "And even if they did, who would they tell? My father practically built the new science wing. You think anyone's going to risk that relationship over a few test scores?" Mr. Peterson kissed her neck, and I felt bile rise in my throat. This wasn't just academic dishonesty. This was an adult teacher in a position of authority taking advantage of a student, even if that student seemed to be an eager participant. "What about the Rodriguez kid?" Mr. Peterson asked suddenly, and my blood went cold at hearing my name. "I saw him staring during the last exam. He's been asking questions about grading policies." "Charlie?" Madison's voice carried a note of disdain. "He's nobody. Scholarship kid whose mother cleans bedpans. He knows better than to make waves. Besides, even if he said something, who would believe him over me?" I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. I made it to the parking lot before I realized I was shaking, and I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic trying to process what I'd just witnessed. This wasn't just about cheating anymore. This was about a teacher exploiting his position to engage in an inappropriate relationship with a student. This was about that student using that relationship to manipulate her grades and then threatening other students to keep quiet. This was about a system so corrupted by money and influence that nobody thought they could be held accountable. But most of all, this was about my mother, who was probably just starting another night shift, believing that she was sacrificing her health and her time so her son could get the kind of education that would break the cycle of poverty our family had known for generations. I thought about Mrs. Hamilton's words about things being complicated when prominent families were involved. I thought about Madison's casual dismissal of me as nobody, whose mother cleans bedpans, a description that wasn't even accurate but showed exactly how she and people like her viewed working-class families. I thought about the thousands of dollars my mother had scraped together to supplement my scholarship, money that could have gone toward fixing our leaking roof or replacing our ancient car. And I realized that staying quiet wasn't protecting my education, it was betraying everything my education was supposed to represent. I drove home to our small apartment in a working-class neighborhood about 20 minutes from the manicured lawns of Westfield Academy. My mother was getting ready for work, pulling her scrubs over her tired frame, and I felt a surge of love and respect for this woman who had never compromised her integrity despite having every reason to become cynical about the world. "Como estuvo la escuela, mijo?" she asked, asking about my day the way she did every evening. "Mom," I said, sitting down at our small kitchen table, "what would you do if you found out something was wrong at my school?" "Something really wrong?" She stopped putting on her work shoes and looked at me with concern. "¿Qué pasó?" "What happened?" I told her everything. About the test answers being sold, about the inappropriate relationship between Madison and Mr. Peterson, about the culture of corruption and entitlement that seemed to permeate the school I'd been so grateful to attend. I told her about Madison's threats and Mrs. Hamilton's warnings about how complicated things could get. My mother listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "Your whole life," she finally said in English, which she only used when she was being especially serious. I tell you that education is the way to build a better life. But education without honor, without truth, that's not education. That's just expensive lies. She looked up at me with eyes that had seen poverty, discrimination, and injustice, but had never lost their moral clarity. You do what's right, Charlie. You tell the truth. And if this school doesn't want students who tell the truth, then it's not the school for you. The next morning, I walked into Mrs. Hamilton's office with a detailed written account of everything I'd witnessed and suspected. I included dates, times, specific conversations, and the names of students I'd seen purchasing test answers. I laid out the inappropriate relationship between Madison and Mr. Peterson with as much detail as I could stomach. Mrs. Hamilton read through my statement with growing alarm, asking clarifying questions and taking additional notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and let out a long sigh. Charlie, you realize what this means, don't you? This isn't just going to affect Madison and Mr. Peterson. This is going to create a huge scandal for the school. I know, I said. But that's not my fault. I didn't create this situation, I'm just reporting it. The Ashworth family is going to be furious. They've donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to this school. Madison's father is on the board of trustees. And my mother works nights to help pay my tuition, I replied. She deserves to know that her money is going toward an education based on merit, not corruption. Mrs. Hamilton nodded slowly. You're right. You're absolutely right. This needs to be reported to the administration immediately, and we'll need to contact the authorities about the inappropriate relationship. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of investigations, interviews, and increasingly hostile interactions with my classmates. The administration tried to handle things quietly at first, but when the police became involved due to the inappropriate relationship between a teacher and student, the story leaked to local media. The headlines were everything Westfield Academy had nightmares about: prestigious private school rocked by cheating scandal and teacher misconduct. The school's reputation, carefully cultivated over decades, was severely damaged almost overnight. Mr. Peterson was arrested and charged with inappropriate conduct with a minor. Despite Madison being 18, the relationship had clearly begun when she was younger, and the power dynamic made it inherently exploitative. He was fired immediately and faced criminal prosecution. Madison's perfect academic record came under scrutiny, and it became clear that her grades had been artificially inflated for years. Her early admission to Harvard was rescinded, and she faced potential criminal charges for her role in the cheating ring. The investigation revealed that she'd been selling test answers to students across multiple subjects, generating thousands of dollars in profit. But the consequences extended far beyond the immediate players. 3 other teachers were found to have knowledge of the cheating ring and had chosen to look the other way. Several students who'd purchased answers faced academic probation or suspension. The school's accreditation was reviewed, and their reputation among elite colleges was severely damaged. And me? I became the most hated student at Westfield Academy. Madison's friends, who'd previously ignored me, now actively made my life miserable. They spread rumors about my family, my scholarship status, and my motivations for destroying their friend's life. I was excluded from study groups, ignored in classes, and subjected to a campaign of social ostracism that made clear I was no longer welcome in their world. But something interesting happened during those difficult weeks. Other students, ones who'd been quietly struggling with the same moral concerns I'd felt, began reaching out to me. Students who'd felt pressured to cheat to keep up with artificially inflated grades. Students who'd been excluded from the inner circle of wealth and privilege. Students who'd been questioning whether Westfield's reputation was deserved. I've been wanting to say something about the cheating for months, confided Jessica Park, a junior whose parents were immigrants from South Korea who ran a small restaurant. But I was afraid no one would believe me. Madison and her crew made me feel like I was stupid because I couldn't afford to buy test answers, said Marcus Thompson, a basketball player on partial scholarship. I thought there was something wrong with me because I was actually studying while they were just buying grades. Slowly, I realized that the toxic culture at Westfield had been affecting more students than just me. The pressure to keep up with kids who could buy their way to success had created an environment where honest students felt inadequate and cheating was normalized. The school administration, faced with a public relations nightmare and potential legal liability, instituted sweeping reforms. They implemented new honor code policies, increased oversight of teacher-student interactions, and established anonymous reporting systems for academic misconduct. They also expanded their financial aid program and created support systems for students from working-class backgrounds. But for me, the damage to my faith in the institution was irreversible. I finished my senior year at Westfield, but I no longer saw it as the pinnacle of educational excellence I'd once believed it to be. Instead, I saw it as a place where money and connections mattered more than character, where the pursuit of prestige had corrupted the very values education was supposed to instill. When graduation came, I walked across the stage to accept my diploma with mixed feelings. I'd maintained my grades through the chaos and earned admission to several good colleges with substantial financial aid. But I was also walking away from an institution that had taught me as much about moral courage as it had about academic subjects. Madison didn't walk at graduation. She'd withdrawn from school after the criminal charges were filed and the Harvard admission was rescinded. Her family's reputation in Charlotte's social circles was permanently damaged, and her father quietly resigned from the board of trustees. Mr. Peterson was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison. His wife divorced him, and his teaching career was permanently ended. The cheating ring was completely dismantled, and several students faced consequences that would follow them for years. But perhaps more importantly, the culture of entitlement and corruption that had enabled the scandal was finally brought into the light. Looking back now, from my dorm room at a state university where I'm studying on an academic scholarship I earned honestly, I realize that discovering the truth about Westfield Academy was one of the most important lessons of my education. I learned that prestige without integrity is meaningless, that expensive doesn't necessarily mean excellent, and that sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is speak truth to power, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. My mother was right, education without honor is just expensive lies. And while exposing those lies cost me my place in Westfield's elite social hierarchy, it gave me something much more valuable: the knowledge that I could maintain my integrity even when it was difficult, and that real excellence can't be bought or sold. The private school that was supposed to open doors for me ended up teaching me the most important lesson of all: that the doors worth walking through are the ones that open for people who refuse to compromise their principles, regardless of the price they have to pay.